Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. So I love creature design and I feel like I don't do it enough on my channel. So today we are going to be designing some creatures, but with a bit of a twist. I've had the idea for a while now to draw some Pokemon but with a completely different type than they usually have. And this has actually been on the list of things to do for a while now, but I just haven't gotten around to doing it. Now, in trying to decide which Pokemon I wanted to change up and mix things around with, I actually thought of a few, but then it came to me. I wanted to change up and completely destroy the most famous Pokemon of the whole franchise. I'm going to be changing Pokemon's most beloved mascot, Pikachu. And to do that today, I'm going to be using my iPad Pro and my favorite digital art program, Procreate. Not sponsored or anything, I just really love Procreate. So to start off, I wanted to pick a type that was a little bit easy, just to test the waters a little bit, and yes, we are doing water type. I felt like water type was a pretty easy one to try and convey. Basically, you just have to make the Pokemon blue and give it a little bit of an aspect of possibly living in water, maybe some flippers or something like that. But I really wanted to play around with the design and just have a little bit of fun. You see, one thing that I decided to do, which I'm quite glad I did, was play around a little bit with Pikachu's famous black ear tips. Usually it's just a sort of curved line on the tips of his ears, and a few Pikachus in the past have had slightly different patterns, but I wanted to try and give it a little bit of a bubbly look, as if maybe, water. Other than that, I gave him a few different anatomical changes here. As you can see, he's got some nice little flippers to help him propel himself in the water, as well as a curly tail that I kind of maybe stole a little bit from Bulbasaur. But other than that, I also gave him some wide little hands just to help him swim through the water. And as you can see, his cheek pouches are now green and a little bit more puffy. I felt like instead of storing electricity in these cheeks, perhaps he could store water in these cheeks to obviously, do water type moves, but also maybe when he's swimming underwater, he could store air in those cheeks too so that he can swim for longer periods of time. Now at the same time, I couldn't help myself but to give him just a little touch of derpiness. When I first drew the mouth and just gave him a little bit of a smile, I felt like it was a little bit boring, but I couldn't give him an open wide smile mouth because he's underwater and obviously, probably holding his breath because I don't think he's an actual fish. So I decided to have his little tongue poking out. I just felt like it was really cute and it gave him just a little bit more character. Now, as you can see, he is swimming underwater just a little bit, and I felt like I really wanted to play with that a little and try and get some really interesting effects. Most notably, as you can see, I'm trying my best to get a sort of water reflection pattern over him. You've probably seen this a few times in pictures of like animals or people underwater. You'll have that sort of sunlight reflecting through the surface of the water, and it has these really cool sort of swirly pattern. I don't know what the name for that is, but I really like the aesthetic and I feel like it definitely gives the illusion of him being underwater, and it's just a little bit more fun and a little bit more detail, and that's what I'm all about. I basically just filled in a whole layer of a very, very, very pale bluish white color, and then I used a clipping mask so that it was only clipping on the Pikachu character here, and then after that I gave it a little bit of a blend mode just to try and get a few of those details to show through a little bit, and then after that I went in and I erased a bunch of random shapes. Now these shapes are obviously in the sort of weird, flowy blobby shapes of the water above, and I just kept erasing those shapes here and there, trying to get a nice sort of pattern all over this Pikachu's body. And then after that I sort of softened the opacity just a little bit, just so that it wasn't a little bit, too crazy. After this, I just wanted to play around a little bit with bubbles in the water because I feel like maybe he's just jumped in the water here. So there's going to be a few bubbles around him, and just add a little bit more detail and a little bit more ambience to this piece. And I really like how I have some bubbles here just sort of trailing off the flippers and just around him, sort of adding a little bit more detail around the edges of the artwork. After this, it's just a little bit more detail in the eyes, and we are done with this artwork. So with this next little guy, I felt like I wanted to give Pikachu a type that was a little bit more tricky to sort of encapsulate. And I really like this guy. I think he is quite cute. He's a bit of a gem, and we are doing rock type. So this one was a little bit more tricky. I kind of struggled a little bit in the sort of concept stage. I really wanted to encapsulate that really cute sort of bubbly, round, soft little mouse character into a element that was hard and unmoving and crispy like rocks. But I think I managed, and I really like how I kept his overall aesthetic the same. His silhouette is quite similar to a regular Pikachu, and I tried my best to keep those shapes the same so that it really felt like a Pikachu, because we were really going to deviate with the colors. Instead of a bright, colorful character, we were going to have him mostly gray and brown. But I was able to work my way around that a bit with the addition of gems and sort of crystals on him, because crystals are technically rocks, so I was going to add those just to add a little bit of color and just a little bit more detail into this little creature. I really like how I kept the ears mostly solid, and instead of a pattern of a black ear tip, I just kept them completely yellow because I felt like there was a lot of grey on this creature already, and I really wanted to just add a little touch of yellow so that it still felt familiar enough to call it a Pikachu. With that tail, I tried to keep it as familiar as I could to a Pikachu's tail, but without having it a lightning bolt shape. And I got around that with just a sort of curvy, thin, more like a mouse tail, but on the end we do have a nice sort of squarish gemstone crystal yellow thing. I don't know what rock it is, but it's a gem and it's shiny and it's yellow. His cheeks are also made out of precious gems, as well as the stripes on his back, which instead of stripes, they're sort of cracks with, sort of gems sort of coming out of the rock surface. I've really tried with this one to try and keep it, fresh and different, but also still familiar enough that it wasn't too jarring. Now, just with the grey surface and then the gems poking out, I still felt like it wasn't, obvious enough that it was a rock type. So I added some cracks all over his body, as you can see, and those are just to sort of show that it is rock. I tried my best anyway. I feel like it works. I feel like looking at him, he probably has obtained these cracks in his body from, tough Pokemon battles, and I kind of like that idea. Now with the shading on his body, there are two very distinct types of shading that I've used on him, and that is a sort of grungy, sort of textural and natural looking sort of shading all over his grey part of his body, and I tried to keep it nice and loose and use some brushes that were really grungy, like a charcoal brush, and then like I think it was like burnt earth, and then like rusted metal or something like that, and I tried to use them to give him the feeling of like grit and dirt all over his body, because he's made of rock. And as well as that, I also used basically a line art brush to shade the crystal parts, and because they're crystals, they're shiny, they're glossy, they don't really have much texture on them other than the cracks and the crevices, so I kept it mostly cell shading on those parts, but I feel like it really does look sort of glossy and shiny like a gem. Now with those gems, I really tried my best to sort of push the highlights as much as I could, and I used an almost white as well with a really sort of small brush just to try and get some edge lighting around just some of the shapes of the crystals, just to really push that glossy look. Now it's time for the background, and it was quite obvious what I, had to put him in. He is in a cave with some stalactites and stalagmites around him, and I wanted to try and keep it nice and dark so that the bright colors of him stood out the most. After this, it was just a few more details I had to add. I wanted to add a little bit of white tips to his front claws just to emphasize them a little bit and show that they're nice and sharp, and perhaps he uses these little cute little claws to dig through rock, as well as just some highlighting here and there just to emphasize some parts that were starting to get lost in the dark background. And yeah, this guy is mostly done, and I have to say I love this guy. He's bright, he's cute, but he still has that Pikachu essence. Now with this next one, I decided to choose a Pokemon typing that was completely different from, the original electric type. With this one, I wanted to push the cute as much as I could until it was almost sickening, and the type I chose was the fairy type. Now this type does deviate the most from Pikachu compared to the other ones, and that's because I really wanted to push the fairy sort of essence. Pikachu's already quite cute, and you probably could just slap fairy type on him and it would probably work, but I really wanted to go 110% with this and just cram as much fairy type looks into this one little creature. And it's actually kind of funny because the inspiration for this sort of creature actually comes from not a fairy type Pokemon. I actually took a little bit of inspiration from Mew. Mew is actually a psychic type Pokemon, and it was the first ever mythical Pokemon as well. And yeah, I actually decided to pick Mew just a little bit for inspiration because it is a very, very cute little fuzzy not round, but pink flying little creature, and that's kind of the feeling that I wanted to have for this, fairy type Pikachu. If you can't tell, I really tried to push this one to the extreme. Now with him, I really tried to emphasize that bean shape that Pikachu has, well, mostly old style Pikachu. I gave him really tiny hands and tiny little feet that he probably never stands on because he floats around instead. And of course I gave him love heart shapes on his ears, as well as the most sickeningly cute, extremely excited, happy little face. And for good measure, I gave him a little cloud pattern on his belly because why not? I felt like it needed just a little bit more detail. Now I really wasn't sure what I was going to do for the tail because with Pikachu, his tail is an electric, bolt shape. Now with, the other ones, I tried to emphasize his element a little bit in that tail as well. And I did not know what I was going to do for the tail in fairy type. And then I just thought to myself, fairies. Fairies have wings. Let's put some wings on his tail. That should work. So he has a little bit of a butterfly shape on his tail. Now I'm not sure if he actually flies with that tail. I don't think he does. I think he just really hovers and it's just kind of there for looks, but it is cute. Now for his color palette, I really wanted to keep mostly to pastels with an emphasis on pink because we're going fairy type extreme here, and a lot of fairy types do have pink, but I want to add a few different colors here as well. As you can see, there is some sort of cyan and purple and just a tiny bit of yellow on his cheeks. I kept his cheek pouches very subtle here, and I pretty much just used an airbrush to add a little bit of a blush sort of shape on his cheeks instead of a hard circle, and I did that because I wanted his facial features to be really soft. Now of course I'm adding a little bit of colored line art here because I really want to sort of keep that pastel aesthetic, and a black outline really isn't going to help with that, and I feel like once I add that color onto the line art, it really helps to sort of just push the colors and the whole vibrancy of the illustration, especially on that tail. Now with the shading, I really wanted to be soft, so I did use a little bit of airbrush here and there, but I felt like you just needed a little bit more texture. It was kind of getting a little bit boring, so I went in and I found a water brush texture and I used that for a bit of the shading as well. For the background, I decided on a sort of dark, mystical, eerie kind of forest. I did keep it mostly unnatural colors though because I really wanted to push that magical feel to it. The background is quite a bit abstract, but I feel like it sort of captures that mystical, creepy, slightly eerie feeling of a fairy. And of course, to add to that, I decided to give him a little bit of a glow around him, just to give him a feeling of perhaps, fairy power emanating from his body. Perhaps he's a powerful fairy type, and even though he looks cute and, non-dangerous, he can probably fight pretty well. Now all I want to do is just push the contrast just a little bit more because I love to do that, and with that I'm going to add a nice sort of vignette around with a nice dark blue color, and just have that in one of the layers of the background so it's not too intense, but it does sort of draw your eye towards the bright colors in the middle of the illustration. And yeah, I love this guy. I think he's really cute. here's the final results of all 3 of these illustrations. I'm not sure how much Pikachu I sort of captured in them, but I think that they're really cute and they really do show their elemental types, I feel anyway. So anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please smash like and subscribe to get your Scribble fix in the future, and comment below which one of these 3 is your favorite. I hope you all have a lovely day. Please stay safe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye everyone.